Good start, yeah? In the name of the Father, the Son, Holy Spirit, and God, amen. So, you've been doing Acts, presumably for quite a while now, because you're up to chapter 22. How many of you remember well what's been happening in Acts so far? No. Like, how many of you can situate, like, if I start talking about chapter 22, how many of you situate, like, yeah, I sort of know parts of Acts and I know what story we're continuing, like the whole sort of a thing? Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, in Jerusalem. It's actually a really good summary. Yeah, well done. Two big parts. Roughly the parts that we usually consider sort of something to do with Peter and then something to do with Paul. Another way of sort of looking at the two parts, sort of chapters 1 to 12, Pentecost, early tension in Jerusalem, early persecution in Jerusalem, and then a lot of people in the church get kicked out of Jerusalem. And so there's this spreading, this almost natural, consequent spreading out from Jerusalem into Judea, Samaria, further abroad. And so that's what sort of kicks off a lot of missionary trips. And so that's when the focus starts to go to Paul. Yeah. You would have then gone through from about chapter 13 to about 20, the missionary trips, right? And so now we're in a little section where Paul is back on his way to Jerusalem, right? Yeah. All right, cool. Chapters 21 and 22 and a bit more come as one unit. So if we don't remember chapter 21, chapter 22 is going to be a little bit off because it's the middle of a conversation that started in the previous chapter. So, let me just give you a quick reminder of what was going on in 21. Do we remember that there was a prophecy about Paul going to Jerusalem? There's a particular prophet who holds a belt, ties himself up, and goes, "This is what Paul will be like if he goes to Jerusalem," right? And everyone starts getting really distressed, and they're telling Paul, well, don't go to Jerusalem. Why would you go to Jerusalem if that's where you're going to be sort of arrested by the Jews, handed over to the Gentiles? Because who else, I guess, should be an obvious question, but who else is going to Jerusalem knowing that this is probably going to be a bad situation, is arrested by the Jews, handed over to the Gentiles, and eventually gets killed? Jesus, right? The easy answer. So of course, any follower of Jesus knows that really well, knows what the issue is, and is telling anyone who's about to walk into that, maybe rethink, right? So of course they're worried about Paul in Jerusalem. And then Paul goes into Jerusalem. Like Paul says, look, I'm willing to die for Christ. I'm happy to go into Jerusalem. He goes into Jerusalem. And people in Jerusalem, right? Like he got warnings before he went to Jerusalem. In Jerusalem, they're saying to him, dude, like, this is not going to be safe for you, right? But he's urged to keep up Jewish appearances, right? Like he's urged to participate in certain rituals that would hint of his sort of fidelity to Jewish law, right? And even if you go to Paul's letters, you get a sense for how Paul is thinking about these things. Do people remember that It's a very famous line in 1 Corinthians. I have become all things to all men. Can anyone repeat? Can anyone finish that thought? I've become all things to all men, that I might by all means save some. Right? There's this idea of Paul saying, I will do whatever it takes for whoever is in front of me to save them. It's this beautiful idea that Paul is very flexible when it comes to his service, when it comes to his preaching, right? Whatever it takes, he's happy to do. So Paul says, all right, let's do the ritual thing, let's keep up appearances. He goes into the temple. People recognize him in the temple as he was been warned, right? He knows he's walking into a problem. He gets dragged out of the temple, and I love that Luke adds the detail that they shut the doors of the temple after they drag him out. They start beating him, and the Romans, who are in charge of the area, recognize that there's an issue. They run in, they take Paul out. Paul can't walk, so they're carrying Paul out. And then Paul says, wait, let me speak to this mob that was just beating me. Right? That's how chapter 21 ends. So chapter 22 starts with, brethren and fathers, hear my defense before you now. So it's Paul, he's badly beaten, and he's just said, let me speak to this angry mob that was beating me half to death. Right? Does that seem okay? All right, cool. All right, now, I've been told that you guys love to read out loud. So who can I get to do the reading for me? Yeah, sweet, thanks. Anyone keen to read for us? Do you mind if I get you to start? Just that guy in green shirt. Thanks, mate. It's the inviting smile, sorry. I'll bounce around a bit though. You won't have to read the whole chapter. So chapter 22, Acts. We'll go through just a couple of verses.
Brethren and fathers, hear my defense before you now. And when they heard that he spoke to them in the Hebrew language, they kept Paul silent. Then he said, I am indeed a Jew born in Tarsus of
Cilicia. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Brought up in the city at the feet of Gamaliel, taught according to the strictness of our father's law, and was zealous towards God as you are today. I persecuted this way to the death, binding and delivering into prisons both men and women, as also the high priest bears me witness, and all the council of the elders, for whom I also received letters to the brethren, and went to Damascus to bring in chains even those who were there, to Jerusalem to be punished.
Thanks, man. All right, so let's stop there. Let's digest, right? So, Paul's, right, keep in mind, context. Paul's just been badly beaten by a mob, rescued by the Romans so that it stops this uproar. And then Paul says to the Romans, no, let me speak to the angry mob who was beating me up, right? So he's trying to have another go at engaging with this angry mob. I don't think I'd do that. But why is it that you think he's saying in why is it that Luke sort of adds that line in verse 2, and when they heard, the angry mob heard that he spoke to them in the Hebrew language, they kept all the more silent. Why would that have to do anything with how well they're listening? But why is Hebrew so useful to hear? Who's the angry mob? Where are they from? What's their deal? And why are they angry at Paul? Like, what did Paul do wrong? If there's going to be an angry mob, they probably have an agenda. Like, they've got a reason why they're going to go and brutally beat someone up. Why are they beating Paul up? What's their issue with Paul? This is resting on your knowledge of chapter 21 and maybe the rest of Acts. Who's Paul? Like, think back. Who's Paul? What's his, story? Nice Christian Coptic boy raised in the church? What's his issue? Right. So, temple, Jewish, right? Raised as a scholar, yeah, 100%. Persecuted the Christians, right? And in chapter 9, you already got a glimpse of this. What was his flip? Right. Road to Damascus, blinded, knocked off his horse, that whole thing. He's now with the Christians. So then who would be annoyed at him? Right, his former mates, of course. So, he's traveling along with mates. He goes off one way. His mates are like, no, this is come back. You're doing the wrong thing. That's the group. That's the angry mob that's going, no, we don't like what you're doing, because you've gone not just in Jerusalem, but you're now going out to all these different places and saying Jesus is Lord, when we're 100% sure Jesus was just this false prophet, and we shouldn't listen to him, and he's dead, and he didn't rise from the dead. I don't know what you're talking about. So they're saying you're messing with the integrity of the Jewish faith. You're leading people astray, right? Which is why when they saw him in the temple, they drag him out of the temple first, close the doors so that no other sort of filth gets into the temple, and then they go and deal with him. And what's their solution to dealing with him? Beat him to death, right? Get rid of him, right? Yeah. So then here, this mob is now hearing him speak what language? Hebrew. Why is that so special to them? It's their language, right? And it's a language tied to the Jewish faith. So there's something there, right? Paul is wise. He's speaking in a way that the mob in front of him is all right, he's at least speaking our language, right? He's speaking on our terms. Okay. And then what does he say? What's his defense? Read through verses 3. Just read through 3. What's his defense? What's Paul's sort of words? Angry mob. They're hating on him for messing with the Jewish faith. And what's his response? I am indeed a Jew. Why would he need to say I'm indeed a Jew? Because it was in question, right? Why is he saying I was raised in this city? What's this city to them? What's this city? What is it? Starts with a J. Jerusalem, right? And Jerusalem is the liturgical epicenter of the faith, right? Of the Jewish faith. Why? Because the temple is there. Why? Because this is where all the big festivals are held. Because this is where Jews 3 times a year take pilgrimage to attend the high festivals, right? So the epicenter of the Jewish faith, Jerusalem. So I am indeed a Jew, raised in this city, at the feet of Gamaliel. Anyone who knows the Jewish scholars knows that Gamaliel is one of the heavies, right? The heavies of the heavies. He's one of the only two. So does anyone know what the word rabbi means? Teacher, yeah, 100%. So Gamaliel in the Jewish tradition has not just the title rabbi, but rabban, which is teacher of the teachers, right? So as far as the rabbis go, they look at him as one of the heavies. So for Paul to say, I studied under this guy, they're like, okay, decent pedigree, right? And he continues, I was taught according to the strictness of our father's law. Your dad's law, my dad's law. Your dad's dad's law, my dad's dad's law. Right? Your lineage is my lineage. Continues going on. I was zealous as you all are zealous. He's speaking to an angry mob. Of course they're zealous, right? And of course he can say that he was zealous. Why? He was persecuting persecuting the Christians, right? Literally dragging them either to death or back to Jerusalem, right? To prison. So Paul can say, I'm zealous just as you are. What's he doing? He's building rapport with this angry mob. Not terribly, mind you, but we'll see how it goes. And then he says, I persecuted this way. This way is like a technical term for Christianity. So the way or this way in the book of Acts is like a technical term for the Christian faith. So I persecuted this way. I persecuted the Christians, right? This sect, this Jesus group. Just like the mob's doing, right? The mob is hating on Paul. Why? Because he's part of that sect. So again, he's building rapport with them, building a connection with them, saying, what you're doing, I was doing. I can understand your actions. And then his last sort of hit, and the high priests bear me witness of what I was doing. So if you don't believe that what's coming out of my mouth is true, ask your leaders. Ask the guys who sent me. Right? So he's taking time and building this sense of connection between him and an angry mob. Just as an aside, it's amazing communication. If any of you guys are really sort of wanting to get better at communication, study that. Learn to not just get to your end point of disagreement with someone, but learn to lay a solid foundation of agreement and commonality with someone before you then start to talk about diverging ideas, right? The fact that you can the fact that you can lay a foundation of agreement means that you're more likely to have a fruitful conversation with someone. Same sort of thing goes for apologetics. If you're talking to someone outside the faith, talking to someone in a different faith, you need a level of commonality, right? Between me and another Coptic person, we can take like liturgy, Bible, a lot of things for granted, right? For me and someone that's Jewish, obviously the New Testament is up for grabs, right? Like I'm going to believe that they're not. For someone who's an atheist, I've got to throw out the Old Testament as well. But there's a possibility of finding common ground. You just have to know where to look, right? Okay, so Paul's doing an amazing job with a mob that was beating him up like half a chapter ago, right? Amazing job of communication. Okay, so we've got a sense for what was happening. Paul lays down where he was coming from. I was the same as you. I was doing the same things as you. All right, what does he then jump onto? So 6 to 11. Gents, do you mind if I ask one of the next guys to read? If you don't mind. We'll go 6 to 11, if that's all right. Thanks, man. All right, awesome. Thank you, man. All right, so whenever you're reading, it's good to try and think what strikes you as interesting, weird, confusing. When you read that passage that Paul is relaying, right? This is Paul telling about what's happened to him. What comes to mind? Does anything sort of click over in your mind? Does anything seem weird? Does anything seem moving? Anything at all? Verses 6 to 11. So whenever you're reading a passage, always good to ask yourself, what seems weird? What seems like moving? What makes sense? What doesn't make sense? Right? Like what comes to mind when you read that passage? Yeah, right? So there's this, like he's laid a foundation of, this is what I had in common with you, this is what you have in common with me, like this is our common foundation. But, and this is where he starts to diverge, he's saying, but this is what has happened to me. Let me make my actions, my thoughts intelligible to you, so you understand the path that has led me to where I am now, right? Paul is trying to explain himself. And so, yeah, he's saying, this is the experience that I had. Let me share it, right? 100%. Any other thoughts that come up? There's no right or wrong in that one, but... All right, I'll tell you what comes up for me. One, this is post-resurrection, right? As the book of Acts is. So Paul has just had an encounter with the risen Christ, right? But he didn't realize who it was. He had to ask. He had to say, like, who are you, Lord? Right? Like, there was a question there. It's interesting because in a few other resurrection appearances, people also don't recognize who Jesus is, right? Also written by Luke, Road to Emmaus, the two disciples. Jesus joins them, and they don't realize that it's Jesus, right? So there's this curiosity that's like piqued within them. Same as with Paul. The fact that Jesus says, me, why are you persecuting me? What does that suggest to you? Like, why doesn't Jesus say, my church, my people, the people I hold dear? Why me? Like, why though? Why? Like, is it true, for example, if someone persecutes me, that you're upset for me? I don't know. Does anyone else find that convincing? No? No? Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. Does anyone else have anything else? No, I mean, it's a good question, right? Like, why does he say me? Why does he say me? I mean, you're right to suggest that there is some link there. But he is the church? Explain that one. I'm not going to take anyone to task theologically. Like, this is just us trying to understand. Explain away, mate. Any thoughts? Like, even if it's just, a half a thought, we'll take it. Maybe not. Maybe not. I think that, yeah, you're definitely onto something. There's some sort of a link that we're suggesting between Jesus and the Christians, right? And gents down here, you're right to suggest that that link is something about the church, right? And some of the language that we use to suggest that link is we are the body of Christ, right? The body of Christ. And it would be wrong to think of that language as metaphorical language. It is not metaphorical language. It is literal language. Why? Because in baptism, we are joined to Christ. In communion, we are joined to Christ. And so, yes, in some real sense, yeah, Christ is the church. But you are the church. But you are Christ, and Christ is you, right? Like you're united in a very real way so that when you are hurt, Christ is hurt. When Christ is hurt, the aim is we are hurt. The same things that hurt him hurt us. You can see that that is not necessarily completely worked out in all of our lives properly. For example, when you hear about a war on the other side of the world, how many of you are deeply, deeply hurt by that? Be honest. Right. There's a lag, there's a sort of broken link between me and others, right? It's the thing that I want to be true in your answer. That I'm human, they're human. That we share the same form. And if I was a decent person, that would tear me up inside. The evidence that we're interacting with something like that is, I asked, if I got hurt, would you care? Maybe if I got hurt, would my mum care? My mum would probably care. I hope my mum would care, right? If I got hurt, would my wife care? Like, there is a certain series of concentric circles that we could draw around each person, and it's like these are the people that love and care for you to the point of, like, what do we mean by that love? It's if you get hurt, they get hurt. Right? There's a link that is close enough between you that any damage to you is damage to them. Any damage to them is damage to you. So that there is some link between you. But the further out it goes, the weaker it is. Right? The fact that Christ takes that up for the church and ultimately for the entire world, it suggests something strong, this link that is sort of like the goal, what we want to get to out of like love and union with one another. All right. So Jesus using that terminology, persecuting me. All right. Maybe one other thing to sort of make a point of in that passage. Paul is talking about his experience meeting the risen Christ, right? What happens to him physically? Blinded? What's the other thing? Falls to the ground, right? There's a gorgeous icon. I might have to show you after. I don't know. I doubt you'd be able to see it here. It's this icon where where Paul is falling, like he's mid-fall off a horse. He's literally upside down in the icon. You could tell that he's very disoriented. That bout of blindness and that disorientation, it's the same thing, right? It's the same experience where someone's stopped in their tracks. He literally was stopped in his tracks. He's on the way to Damascus, right? He stopped in his tracks. He's literally knocked off his horse, right? There's something in what Paul is thinking and doing that requires a radical transformation. And that's his moment for it. It's an interesting thing to think, what are your moments that are like that? What are the things that stop you in your tracks? What are the things that like knock you off your horse? Right? Have you ever had those moments? Yeah, no, some of you, yeah, yeah. All right. It's amazing that someone who Luke describes as, in Acts 9, breathing threats and murder against the Christians has one encounter, and he's got enough humility and patience to reorient his life. All right, let's read on. So 12 to 16. If anyone, mate, do you want to read on just 12 to 16 for us? Thanks, man. Yeah, 12 to 16. Thanks, man.
Then a certain Ananias, a devout man according to the law, having a good testimony with all the Jews who dwelt there, came to me, and he stood and said to me, Brother Saul, receive your sight. And at the same hour I look up at him, and then he said, The Lord, the God of our fathers, has chosen you, that you should know his will, and see the just one, and hear his voice of his mouth. For you will be his witness to all men, of whom see and heard. And why are you waiting? And arise to be baptized and wash your sins, calling on the name of the Lord.
Thanks, man. So, 12 to 16, right?
Yeah.
What does Ananias sort of tell Paul to do? What's his main thrust? (12 to 16). What's Ananias' message to Paul? Be a witness, right? Yeah, 100%. The word witness in Greek, do anyone know what the word witness in Greek is? Starts with an M. Martyr, right? Yeah. That's what we mean when we talk about the martyrs. We mean someone who has witnessed, right? Someone who has lived in a way and died in a way that has shown forth their connection to God, right? It is not necessarily about the blood and gore of their death. It is not necessarily about the pain. The pain is a signifier of something, of a certain fidelity, but the martyrdom is the witness, right? And if you're willing to go through pain and suffering, then you're willing to be faithful to the thing that you're witnessing for, right? So Paul is told, you will be a witness, right? Just like what you're doing now, right? Because this is Paul talking to this angry mob that was beating him up, right? And Paul is saying, I was told to be a witness. So he's saying what he's doing. He's doing what he's saying. But there's also this idea of Paul being told, you now have a purpose, right? He's knocked off his horse. He was already doing something. Knocked off his horse, led by the hand into a city. He's not doing anything. And now he's been given a new purpose, right? Whatever he was doing before, stopped, new purpose. The way that he was seeing the world, literally blinded, and now given sight with a new purpose, right? Like everything in him has shifted. And that's connected to his baptism. Ananias is saying, go be baptized, right? And that's exactly what we should think when we think of baptism. Baptism is a shift, right? We literally do it in the middle of the baptism rites, right? Turn one way, we reject Satan. We turn the other way, we accept Christ, right? There's this literal turning to signify a mental movement, right? The other words that we use for it are matanya, metanoia, right? Change of mind. It's repentance, which just means change your mind. And that's exactly what's happening to Paul here. It's a shift in the way that he's thinking, shift in the way that he's acting, right? And so this is his moment of confession, moment of baptism, moment of illumination, moment of like repurpose. Like everything is shifted for him in this moment. And that's what he's sharing with this angry mob that he had so much in common with before. And now he's saying the reason I'm thinking and doing differently is this moment of conversion, this moment of change, right? All right. Can we get someone else, maybe one of the gents in the... Oh, yeah. Anyone else who's willing to read? I'm happy for you to fight it out between us. Verses 17 to 21.
Now it happened when I returned to Jerusalem and was praying in the temple, that I was in a trance, and saw him saying to me, make haste and get out of Jerusalem quickly, for they will not receive your testimony concerning me. So I said, Lord, they know that in every synagogue I imprisoned and beat those who believe on me. And when the blood of your martyr Stephen was shed, I also was standing by consenting to his death, and guarding the clothes of those who were killing him. Then he said to me, depart, for I will send you far from here to the Gentiles.
Thanks, man. Just to get it clear, who is Paul talking to? So he's in the middle of talking to the Jews, but he's relaying a conversation that he's had with someone. Who was he talking to? Who's he talking to? If you don't know the answer, read the passage again. Figure it out. Verse 18 should give it away. And I'm helping a bit too much, but it's all right. Who's Paul talking to? Right, speaking to Jesus, right? I mean, if the capital H didn't, do it for you, the capital M-E, right? Your testimony concerning me, who's he going to give testimony about? Of course, it's Jesus. So Paul's speaking to Jesus, and he's relaying that conversation to this angry mob that was trying to beat him up. What's Jesus telling him to do? Leave Jerusalem. Leave Jerusalem. They're not going to accept your word concerning me. Where is Paul now? Jerusalem. Who's they're not going to accept you concerning me? Literally the people he's speaking to. It's like me coming into Santa Brahms and saying, the guys at Santa Brahms, they won't accept my words. You're right here. I'm speaking about you to you. What are you guys going to be thinking? So Jesus is saying, get out from the city, go somewhere else. And what's Paul saying? Any synagogue I go to, they know me, right? Young and upcoming sort of scholar who's sort of gone around taking people into prison and killing people. They know who Paul is. And Paul is saying, if I go to any other synagogue, they're going to know me. And so what does Jesus tell him? Verse 21, depart, for I will send you far from here to the Gentiles, the non-Jews. Right? Read the next line. And they listened to him until this word. This whole time, angry mob, they're listening. He's speaking in our language. He's spoken to us about what he has in common with us. I'm willing to hear him out. Speak. I don't like you, but speak. He's explaining how he's gone from what we are to what he is. Still willing to hear him out. But now he's suggested that the chosen people of God are no longer his concern. The people that he's got to worry about are the non-Jews, the Gentiles, the people who we won't let in the temple, the people who we won't eat with, the people who we consider unclean. That's now the primary focus of like God's mission for you? No. Like you were already suspect, now you're just talking crap. And so what do? They listened to him until this word, and then they raised their voices and said, "Away with such a fellow from the earth, for he is not fit to live." As in, kill him. Let him die. What we started like the end of the last chapter, finish it off. Then as they cried out the more, tore off their clothes, and threw dust in the air, the commander ordered him, so Roman commander, ordered him to be brought into the barracks and said that he should be examined under scourging so that he might know why they shouted so against him. Because if you're a Roman soldier and you've gone into Jerusalem, fighting between who? Paul is a Jew, other Jews. They're punching on with one another. You're tasked with maintaining peace in the area. What do? You go and break it up. You take Paul out because he seems to be the troublemaker. And then Paul begs you to let him speak to the crowd. That was just punching on with him. You then let him speak. You gave him like a couple of verses, and then what happens? They're in an uproar again. Who are you annoyed at? Paul. Just shut up the first time. Why are you speaking again? You've now started an uproar again. It's what I stopped, and then you started it again. So they want to whip him so that they know exactly what his story is, right? And the reason they don't know the story is the whole thing was happening in Hebrew, right? So they're getting ready to bind Paul to be whipped. Verse 25. And as they bound him with thongs, or other renderings say, as they were sort of tying him up to be lashed, right? Paul said to the centurion, like one of the soldiers in charge of a whole bunch of other soldiers, "Is it lawful for you to whip or scourge a man who is a Roman and uncondemned?" Paul's not an idiot. He knows it's not okay. Just to be sort of clear about that, if you're a Roman citizen, one of the things that you enjoy are certain rights, which means, of the rights, one, people can't torture you or punish you without trying and condemning you by some accepted court, right? So no one can just pick you up off the street and whip you, right? That's a breaking of the law. You can't be sentenced to death unless you're guilty of treason. And if you are sentenced to death, usually, unless like certain types of treason, usually you have the option of exile. Say, I'm going to leave and never come back, right? So you have that option. And if you're Roman and you will be put to death, you won't be crucified, because that's a very degrading way to go. So as a Roman citizen, you enjoy certain rights. Paul is actually a Roman citizen, right? He has his citizenship. So Paul asks, is it lawful for you to scourge a man who is a Roman and not condemned? Because he knows it's not. He's playing with them, right? The centurion hears that, verse 26. When the centurion heard that, he went and told the commander, the next guy up, "Take care what you do, for this man is a Roman." Because if you mess with a Roman, Rome itself messes with you, right? Like, it's an illegal act. You're now bound to law. "Take care what you do, for this man is a Roman." The commander came and said to Paul, "Tell me, are you a Roman?" He said, "Yes." The commander answered, like the commander, the guy who's in charge of people who are in charge of soldiers. He says, with a large sum of money, I bought my citizenship. Right? I bought my citizenship. And Paul says to him, like he one-ups him, Paul says, but I was born a citizen. What you bought, I was born into. Verse 29, then immediately those who are about to examine him, examine is like a nice euphemism for like whip him, withdrew from him. Everyone takes a step back. They're like, I don't want to touch you. And the commander was also afraid after he found out that he was a Roman and because he had bound him. He already knows that he's tied him up and there's no good reason to tie him up. He already knows that this could potentially be a problem. So they all take a step back. No one's going to whip anyone today. And Paul knows that he's evaded a whipping. Last verse. The next day, because he wanted to know for certain why he was accused by the Jews, he released him from his bonds and commanded the chief priests and all their council to appear and brought Paul down and set him before them. So he goes, I'm going to have one more go at having everyone in the one room and try and explain their issue. So Paul has just set himself up for another go at defending himself in front of people, right? Paul has masterfully known when to speak up, when not to speak up, how to speak, how to make sure he's in the right amount of trouble and get out of trouble when he needs to. He's not an idiot. And there's this point that Jesus says to his disciples, I believe it's Matthew 10. Wrote it down somewhere. Yeah, Matthew 10. Be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. Be wise as serpents, harmless as doves. Like wise as serpents, because what's a serpent? Adam and Eve, the one who tricked, right? Be wise. Don't be an idiot. You should be smarter than you're hoping to be, right? You should chase wisdom. But at the same time, we shouldn't be hurting, persecuting, like getting people in a bad way. So harmless as doves. And Paul seems to be a good image of that. All right, I think that's enough to sort of set you up for the next bout that Paul's about to have. Were there any questions there before we finish off? No? All right, awesome. Thank you very much for having me, and to the gents who read, thank you very much for reading. Appreciate it, guys.
Hey guys, thank you so much for coming. Just a couple of announcements. Firstly, food at the back and hangs as usual. And also, next week we will have Bible study. That was hard to say. The 2 weeks following that, so the 25th of December and the 24th of December and the 1st of January, there's no Bible study. So come next week. Don't come the 2 weeks after that because you won't find the church open. Other than that, can we just please stand up for prayer?